The space station called Ethelgard spun slowly in the dark void of space. It was a beautiful place, built from clear glass and white metal. Inside, the air smelled like sweet flowers and expensive perfume. Today, the station was hosting the most important event of the year. It was the wedding of Lisa, the daughter of a human, to Prince Rayan of the great Zylov family. Mark stood near the back entrance of the grand hall. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and skin that had seen too much sun. He wore a simple black suit. It was clean and neat, but it looked old compared to the clothes of the other guests. Mark was a human. In this part of the galaxy, humans were not seen as high-class people. The aliens here thought humans were loud, dirty, and too violent. They called them the primitives. But Mark did not care what they thought. He was here for his daughter. He looked at his hands. They were rough and scarred. He remembered holding Lisa when she was a baby. She was so small then. He remembered teaching her to walk on the grass of Earth. He remembered the day he told her he was joining the Space Defense Force to protect their home. She had cried then. Now, she was getting married to an alien prince, and she lived in a world of floating lights and silk robes. The doors in front of him were closed. He knew Lisa was behind them. He had practiced walking down the aisle with her in his mind 1,000 times. He was ready to give her away. It was a human tradition, and she had promised him he could do it. Suddenly, the doors opened just a crack. A tall, thin face peeked out. It was a Zylov guard. He had green scales and yellow eyes that looked sideways. He looked at Mark with no respect. "You cannot stand here," the guard hissed. "You are blocking the service path." "I am the father of the bride," Mark said. His voice was deep and calm. "I am waiting for my daughter." The guard laughed, a sound like dry leaves crunching. "The bride does not wish to see the manual labor right now. Please move to the side." Mark felt a sharp pain in his chest. It was not a physical pain. It was the feeling of being pushed away. He stepped to the side, into the shadows. A few minutes later, the music started. It was a soft, floating sound that came from nowhere. The big doors opened wide to reveal the hall. Inside, hundreds of aliens sat on glowing seats. They were all beautiful and elegant. At the end of the long walkway stood Prince Rayan. He was tall and very thin. His skin was pale green, and he wore a crown of silver metal. He looked like a doll made of glass. Mark looked for Lisa. She appeared at the entrance. She looked beautiful. Her dress was made of white light, and her hair was pinned up with diamonds. Mark stepped forward, a smile on his face. He held out his arm. But Lisa did not look at him. She looked past him, as if he was a statue. She whispered something to the Zylov guard. The guard nodded and stepped in front of Mark, blocking his way. Lisa began to walk down the aisle alone. She held her head high, smiling at the alien guests. Mark froze. His arm was still half raised. The guests clapped politely. They did not know that a father had just been replaced by a guard. Mark watched his daughter walk away from him. She did not look back. She walked toward her prince, toward her new life, and away from her old one. Mark stood there for a long time. The doors remained open. He could hear the ceremony starting. He felt heavy, like a weight was sitting on his shoulders. He wanted to shout. He wanted to run in there and take her hand. But he knew that would ruin everything. It would just prove that humans are wild animals, just like the aliens said. He took a deep breath. He was a soldier once. He knew how to control his feelings. He lowered his arm and straightened his tie. He walked toward the door. The guard tried to stop him again. "Only guests are allowed," the guard said. Mark looked at the guard. He did not say a word. He just looked at him with eyes that had seen war and death. The guard felt a cold shiver go down his spine. He stepped aside. Mark walked into the hall. He did not go to the front. He walked to the very back, where the shadows were darkest. He found a small chair behind a large silver pillar. He sat down. The suit felt tight around his muscles. He was bigger than the chairs. The metal creaked under his weight. No one noticed him. They were all looking at the prince and princess. Mark looked at the other guests. They were strange creatures. Some were floating balls of light. Some had 4 arms and blue skin. They were all elegant and fragile. Mark felt like a boulder sitting in a garden of flowers. He looked at Lisa again. She was holding Ryan's hand. They were saying vows in a language that sounded like singing. Lisa looked happy. But it was a fake kind of happy. She was trying too hard to look perfect. She was trying to be one of them. Mark turned on the small translator device in his ear. He wanted to hear what they were saying. "We joined today to bring purity to our house," Prince Ryan was saying. His voice was high and thin. "We leave behind the dirt of the outer worlds. We rise above the primitive instincts of flesh and bone." Mark narrowed his eyes. He knew what that meant. Ryan was talking about humans. He was talking about Earth. Lisa nodded along. She smiled at the prince. She laughed at his words. A few guests sitting near Mark whispered to each other. They were tall, bird-like creatures with feathers on their heads. "It is a good match," one whispered. "The girl is almost civilized now. You can hardly see the human in her." "Yes," the other one whispered back. "But imagine the children. They might have those rough hands. Or that hairy skin. It is a risk she takes for the money." Mark gripped the arms of his chair. The metal bent under his fingers. He took a slow breath. He told himself to stay calm. He was here for Lisa. If he hit them, he would be arrested. He would never see her again. The ceremony ended. The music changed to a happy tune. Lisa and Ryan walked back down the aisle. They passed right by Mark's hiding spot. For a second, Lisa looked toward the pillar. Mark thought she saw him. He leaned forward, hope rising in his chest. But she was just looking at her reflection in the shiny metal column. She fixed her hair and kept walking. She walked right past her father without seeing him. The guests stood up to follow the couple to the dining hall. Mark waited until the hall was almost empty. He stood up. His knees popped loudly in the quiet room. He fixed his jacket. He felt hungry, but he knew the food would be small and tasteless. Alien food was always like that. He walked out of the hall and followed the crowd. He felt like a ghost. He was there, but he was not part of their world. He was a reminder of the ugly things they tried to forget. But Mark was not ugly. He was strong. He was solid. And he was not going to leave until he knew his daughter was safe. Even if she hated him, he was her father. He would protect her from anything. Even from herself. He walked into the dining hall. It was filled with long tables covered in white cloth. Waiters floated above the ground, pouring drinks that glowed in the dark. Mark walked to the farthest table, the one near the kitchen doors. He sat down on a wobbly chair. A waiter came over. It was a robot with a silver tray. "We do not have a seat assignment for you, sir," the robot beeped. "I am just here to observe," Mark said. "Bring me water." The robot zoomed away. Mark looked at the head table. Lisa and Ryan sat in the middle. They were laughing. They were the center of attention. Mark sat in the corner. He was alone. But his eyes were sharp. He watched everything. He watched the doors. He watched the guests. He watched the shadows. The aliens around him ignored him. They thought he was just a hired driver or a bodyguard from Earth. They did not know that this primitive man was the most dangerous thing in the room. They did not know that the trash they looked down on was the only thing that could save them if things went wrong. And things were about to go very wrong. Mark could feel it in his bones. It was the same feeling he had before a battle. The air was too still. The laughter was too loud. He took a sip of water the robot placed on the table. The water was warm. He put the glass down and waited. The party continued in the big dining hall. The music played softly, and the aliens talked about money and stars. Mark sat alone at his small table in the back. He watched the guests eat strange foods. There were glowing blue soups and plants that moved on the plate. Mark was not hungry. He just drank his water and watched. At the main table, Lisa laughed at something Prince Ryan said. She touched his arm gently. She looked like she belonged there. She did not look like the girl who grew up on Earth playing in the dirt. She looked like a porcelain doll. Mark remembered how she used to scrape her knees when she fell. Now, her skin was perfect. She had erased every part of her old life. She had even erased him. A waiter floated by with a tray of small cakes. Mark did not take one. He knew that if he ate, he might make a mess. The aliens here did not chew loudly. They did not spill. They were perfect. And they hated anyone who was not perfect. Prince Ryan stood up. He tapped a spoon against his glass. The ringing sound stopped the music. Everyone turned to look at the prince. He smiled, showing teeth that were small and sharp. "Friends and family," Ryan said. His voice was high and clear. "We are here to celebrate the joining of our houses. Today is a happy day." The guests clapped. They tapped their long fingers on the tables. "But today is more than just a wedding," Ryan continued. "Today is a step forward for the Xylov people. For too long, we have been connected to the dark parts of the galaxy. We have been linked to war and to primitive needs." Mark sat up straighter in his chair. He knew who Ryan was talking about. Ryan was looking at the guests, but his words were meant for the back of the room. "We are evolving," Ryan said loudly. "We are leaving behind the brute force of the past. We no longer need the violent ways of the flesh. We are becoming beings of pure mind. My beautiful wife, Lisa, has chosen to leave behind her dirty origins. She has chosen to be civilized. She is no longer a creature of Earth. She is one of us." The room erupted in applause. It was a polite, cold applause. Lisa stood up and bowed. Her face was red, but she was smiling. She looked proud. She looked at the crowd, but she did not look at the corner where her father sat. Mark felt his hands turn into fists. He looked down at his lap. He was a creature of Earth. He was a brute. He had fought in wars to keep people safe. He had killed so that girls like Lisa could grow up and get married. And now, she called him dirty. She called his sacrifice primitive. He wanted to stand up and leave. He wanted to walk out of the station and never come back. But he stayed. He was a father. Fathers do not leave their daughters, even when their daughters are ashamed of them. Suddenly, the lights in the hall flickered. The soft music stopped with a sharp screech. A loud alarm began to wail. It was a low, terrifying sound that vibrated in the floor. Warning! Warning! Unauthorized ship docking in Sector 4. Shields are failing. Warning! The guests looked around in confusion. They were not used to alarms. They lived in a safe world. They thought danger was something that happened to other people. "What is that noise?" a tall alien woman asked. "It is hurting my ears." Before anyone could answer, a loud explosion shook the whole room. The floor jumped. Drinks spilled on the white tablecloths. The guests screamed. Above the main table, the glass ceiling shattered. Huge chunks of clear glass fell from the sky. Some aliens tried to run, but they were too slow. They were not built for running. Smoke filled the room. Through the hole in the ceiling, black shapes dropped down. They landed on the tables with heavy thuds. They were the Kriller. They were a terrifying race of insectoid warriors. They had hard black armor covering their bodies, and legs like spiders. They stood 7 feet tall. Their faces were hidden behind metal masks, and they held glowing red weapons. The Xylof guards at the doors raised their small sonic guns. But they were too slow. The Kriller warriors fired beams of red light. The guards fell instantly. They did not even have time to scream. Panic took over the room. The elegant aliens ran in circles. They knocked over chairs. They tripped on their long robes. They cried for help, but no one came. The waiters, who were robots, just hovered and beeped. The leader of the Kriller, a giant bug with scars on his armor, stepped onto the main table. He crushed the wedding cake under his heavy boot. He pointed a claw at Prince Rayan. "For the hive!" the Kriller leader roared. His voice sounded like metal grinding on stone. "Death to the Xylof!" Prince Rayan turned a shade of pale green. His eyes opened wide, but he did not move. He was frozen with fear. Then, his legs gave out. He fainted. He fell onto the floor and curled up into a ball. He hid his face under his hands. Lisa screamed. "Rayan! Wake up!" 2 Kriller soldiers jumped onto the platform. They grabbed Lisa by her arms. Their claws were sharp, and they tore her beautiful white dress. She cried out in pain. She kicked her legs, but she was weak compared to them. "Let go of me!" she yelled. "Help! Someone help!" But no one helped. The other guests were hiding under their tables. The high elders of the Xylof were using their telepathic powers to try and confuse the attackers, but the Kriller wore helmets that blocked mental attacks. The aliens were helpless. They were like sheep in a pen of wolves. Mark stood up. The crowd was pushing toward the exits, but Mark did not move. He stood still in the center of the chaos. The air smelled like smoke and fear. Mark looked at the Kriller soldiers holding his daughter. He looked at the aliens cowering on the floor. He looked at the prince, who was hiding and shaking. For years, Mark had tried to be polite. He had tried to be quiet. He had let them call him primitive. He had let them ignore him. But now, the party was over. Now, they needed a primitive. Now, they needed a monster. Mark reached into his jacket pocket. He did not pull out a laser gun. He did not pull out a high-tech energy shield. He pulled out a simple, folding knife. It was made of heavy steel. It had a wooden handle that was worn smooth from his hand. It was a tool from Earth. It was sharp, and it was deadly. He flicked the knife open. The click sound was small, but it sounded loud to him. The Kriller soldiers were dragging Lisa toward the hole in the ceiling. They were ignoring the crowd. To them, the humans were just background noise. They were weak. They were nothing. Mark began to walk. He did not run yet. He walked with a steady, heavy pace. He moved between the tables. He stepped over a broken piece of glass. He did not look at the hiding guests. He only looked at the bugs. A Kriller guard saw him. The guard was tall and held a red spear. The guard chattered with its mandibles and lunged at Mark. It wanted to stop the old human. Mark did not stop. He stepped to the side just as the spear came down. He moved with a speed that did not match his size. The spear hit the floor with a spark. Mark grabbed the guard's arm. With a simple twist, he snapped the limb. The Kriller screeched. Mark hit the creature in the chest with the palm of his hand. The armor cracked. The guard flew back and hit the wall. Mark did not even look to see if it was dead. He kept walking. The other guests peeked out from under their tables. They saw the human in the black suit walking through the smoke. He did not have a weapon that glowed. He did not have a shield. He only had a small knife. But for the first time in their lives, they saw something that scared them more than the Kriller. They saw a human who was angry. The smoke in the hall was thick and gray. It burned the eyes of the elegant aliens, but Mark walked through it without blinking. He did not cough. His body was doing something that the aliens could not do. He was adapting. Inside him, a change was happening. The human body is built for survival. When danger comes, the heart beats faster, but the mind becomes calm. This is the predator's instinct. The aliens in the galaxy usually came from prey animals. When they were scared, they froze, or they ran away. But humans came from hunters. When humans were scared, they hunted. 3 large Kriller soldiers saw Mark walking toward them. They chattered to each other in their bug language. They thought the human was crazy. They raised their red plasma weapons. The lasers hummed in the air. They fired at the same time. Mark did not try to hide behind a table. He did not have a shield. He moved his body with fast, sharp jerks. He ducked under the first beam. He stepped to the side to miss the second one. The third beam burned the sleeve of his jacket, but it did not touch his skin. He moved like water flowing around a rock. He closed the distance between them in seconds. The Kriller tried to reload their weapons, but they were too slow. They were used to fighting from far away. They were not used to close combat. Mark reached the first Kriller. The bug was tall, but Mark was strong. Mark grabbed the creature's weapon arm with one hand and punched it in the face with the other. His fist hit the hard mask. The mask cracked. The bug stumbled back. Mark did not stop. He kicked the back of the Kriller's knee, the leg bent the wrong way. With a sickening snap, the bug fell to the floor. The second Kriller swung its sharp claws at Mark's head. Mark blocked the arm with his own forearm. The claws cut into his skin, and blood dripped down, but Mark did not feel the pain yet. The pain would come later. Right now, he had work to do. He used his other hand to drive his knife into the soft joint under the Kriller's arm. The bug screeched a high-pitched noise and dropped its weapon. The third Kriller tried to run away. It turned its back to Mark. That was a mistake. Predators never let their prey go. Mark grabbed the back of the creature's armor. He used his weight and threw the heavy bug across the room. It smashed into a table full of expensive wine. Glass shattered everywhere. Mark stood in the middle of the broken tables. He breathed steadily. His breath made small clouds in the cold air. The aliens who were hiding under their seats peeked out. They saw the humans standing over the fallen monsters. They were confused. They had always been told that humans were weak. They had no claws. They had no armor. Their skin was soft. But this human fought like a demon. Mark looked toward the front of the room. The Kriller captain was still there. He was holding Lisa by the hair. Lisa was screaming and crying. Her beautiful white dress was torn and dirty. The captain saw his soldiers on the floor. He hissed in anger. He realized that one human was a bigger threat than his whole squad. "Kill him!" the captain shouted. 5 more Kriller jumped down from the ceiling. They surrounded Mark. They had swords made of glowing energy. They moved in a circle. They thought they had him trapped. Mark looked at them. He calculated the distance. He looked for weaknesses. He saw that their armor was heavy on the top. They were not fast on their feet. One Kriller lunged forward with a sword. Mark sidestepped and grabbed the sword arm. He pulled the bug off balance and used its own momentum to throw it into another Kriller. They both fell in a heap of legs and arms. Mark did not use his knife anymore. He used the environment. He grabbed a heavy metal chair and swung it like a club. It hit a Kriller in the helmet with a loud clang. The creature dropped. He moved from one enemy to the next. He did not fight with honor. He fought to win. He hit them in the throat. He stepped on their feet. He gouged their eyes. It was ugly and violent. It was the way humans had fought for thousands of years on the rocky plains of Earth. The Xyloph guests watched with their mouths open. They saw the human sweat. They saw the blood run down his arm. They realized that humans had a secret weapon. It was not a gun. It was the ability to keep going when they were hurt. Humans have thick bones and muscles that do not give up. The aliens were terrified. They saw in Mark the face of the species that had conquered its own planet before it even reached the stars. Mark fought his way to the main stage. There was only one Kriller left guarding Lisa. It was a big soldier, maybe a lieutenant. It pushed Lisa away and pulled out a long spear. It pointed the sharp tip at Mark's chest. "You will die, human," the bug hissed through its mask. Mark smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a rabbit. He did not say anything. He just wiped the blood from his knife onto his pants. The spear moved fast. It was aimed at Mark's heart. Mark did not dodge. He stepped into the attack. It was a crazy move. The spear grazed his ribs, cutting a deep line, but it got stuck in his heavy jacket. Mark grabbed the spear shaft with both hands. He pulled hard. The Kriller stumbled forward. Mark head-butted the bug. His forehead hit the creature's faceplate with the force of a hammer. The glass of the mask shattered. The bug fell backward, dazed and confused. Mark finished it quickly. Mark stood over the body and looked at Lisa. She was sitting on the floor, shaking. Her makeup was running down her face with her tears. She looked up at her father. She saw his bloody hands. She saw his wild eyes. She saw the ripped suit. She barely recognized him. "Dad," she whispered. Her voice was small and weak. Mark did not hug her. He did not pick her up. He just stood there for a moment, breathing hard. He looked at her, then he looked at Prince Rayan. The prince was still hiding under the table, covering his head. He had not moved. He had not tried to help Lisa. The silence in the room was heavy. The only sound was the alarms blaring in the distance and Mark's heavy breathing. The cruller captain, still holding a weapon, looked at Mark. The captain was a veteran of many wars, but he had never seen anything like this. He hesitated. The guests were silent too. They looked at Mark with fear. They had mocked him. They had called him a primitive. But now, they knew the truth. They were the weak ones. They were the sheep. And the primitive man in the corner was the only reason they were still alive. Mark felt the weight of their fear. He did not enjoy it, but he used it. He stood tall, a tower of muscle and blood among the fragile silk and lace. The cruller captain looked around the ruined hall. He saw his best soldiers lying on the floor. Some were not moving. Others were groaning in pain. He looked at the human standing in the center of the chaos. Mark was bleeding from his arm and his side. His black suit was torn. But he was standing tall. The captain realized that his squad could not stop this one man. The human did not have armor or lasers. He had something else. He had a will that was harder than diamond. The captain growled one last time, a sound of frustration. He fired his weapon into the ceiling to make a distraction, and then he jumped back into the hole in the roof. The remaining cruller soldiers followed him. They retreated. They preferred to run away and fight another day than to face a human who did not know fear. A moment later, the station security force burst through the doors. They were Federation police. They wore blue armor and carried heavy guns. They shouted, "Drop your weapons." But when they saw the scene, they stopped. They saw the dead cruller bugs. They saw the broken furniture. And they saw Mark. They recognized him immediately. They knew what he was. They had seen the videos from the Terran Wars. They knew that a human in a combat state was dangerous. The police kept their distance. They did not point their guns at Mark. They pointed them at the empty ceiling, watching for the retreating enemies. Mark did not pay attention to the police. He knew they would not shoot him. He looked down at his hands. He slowly wiped the green bug blood onto his pants. He took a deep breath and let it out. The red mist in his eyes began to fade. His heart rate slowed down. He was just Mark again. He turned around to look at his daughter. Lisa was still sitting on the floor where the cruller had dropped her. Prince Rayan was still hiding under the table, peeking out with shaking eyes. The High Elder, Rayan's father, was standing nearby. He was a tall, thin Xylof with robes made of gold. He looked terrified, but he was trying to look calm. Lisa saw her father looking at her. She saw the blood on his face. She started to cry harder. She crawled toward him. She looked up at him with eyes full of sorrow. "Dad," she whispered. I was so scared." "Thank you." Mark looked at her. He wanted to hug her. He wanted to tell her it was okay. But then he remembered the way she had closed the door in his face. He remembered the way she had laughed at Rayan's jokes about dirty primitives. She only loved him now because he saved her life. If the cruller had not come, she would still be pretending she did not know him. Mark stepped back. He did not touch her. "You are safe, Lisa," he said. His voice was flat and cold. "The bugs are gone." Lisa reached out her hand to take his, but she stopped. She saw the look in his eyes. It was not the look of a loving father anymore. It was the look of a stranger. She pulled her hand back. She felt ashamed. She looked at her husband, the prince. Rayan was still cowering. He had not moved to help her. He had not fought for her. The only brave person in the room was the man she had tried to hide. Mark turned away from her. He walked toward the high elder. The police moved to stop him, but the elder shook his head. He let Mark pass. The elder was trembling. He had seen the fight. He knew that this human could snap his neck like a dry twig if he wanted to. Mark stopped in front of the elder. He was a head taller than the alien. He looked down at the expensive robes. He reached into his jacket pocket. The elder flinched, thinking Mark was going to pull out a weapon. But Mark pulled out a small, battered data pad. It was an old model, scratched and covered in stickers. It looked very cheap compared to the elegant technology of the Zilov. Mark tapped the screen a few times with his bloody thumb. He turned the screen around so the elder could read it. "I need you to sign this," Mark said. The elder blinked. "What is this, a report for the security?" "No," Mark said. "It is an invoice." The elder leaned forward and read the screen. His yellow eyes went wide. He read the numbers. He read the total at the bottom. Invoice for services rendered. To the House of Zilov. From Mark Miller. 1 Tactical neutralization of hostiles 10 units. 400,000. 2 VIP hostage recovery Princess Lisa. 50,000. 3 psychological counseling for witnesses aliens. 20,000. 4 damage to personal property sued. 10,000. 5 late fee immediate payment required. 20,000. Total due, 500,000. This is a joke, the elder hissed. You saved your own daughter. You do not charge family. Mark shook his head slowly. I am not family. You made that very clear at the start of the ceremony. I was not allowed to walk her down the aisle. I was seated with the service droids. To you, I am just a civilian. A private contractor. Mark pointed to a small camera device in the corner of the ceiling. The station cameras recorded everything. By Galactic Federation law, if a civilian renders aid during a terrorist attack, they are entitled to fair compensation. Especially if they are acting in a capacity they were not invited for. The elder's face turned pale green. You cannot be serious. You are her father. I am the man who just killed 10 Kriller elite warriors to save your son's reputation, Mark said calmly. If I do not charge you, I am a volunteer. But if I charge you, this is a business transaction. And under the trade clause, if you refuse to pay a contractor for life-saving services, the Federation Trade Bank will freeze your assets. You know how much paperwork that will be. Mark leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it was loud enough for the elder to hear. Do you really want the galaxy to know that the Prince of Zilov had to be saved by a primitive human? Do you want the news networks to see the video of your son hiding under a table while an old man with a knife did the fighting? Paying me keeps this quiet. It makes me a mercenary. It keeps your pride intact. The elder looked at his son, who was finally crawling out from under the table. He looked at the dead bugs. He looked at the terrified guests. He knew Mark was right. The Zilov were proud. If people found out they were so weak, their political power would vanish. You would blackmail us? The elder asked. It is not blackmail, Mark said. It is business. The elder stood silent for a long time. The room was quiet. Everyone was watching. Lisa was watching with tears in her eyes. She realized her father was not just being mean. He was teaching them a lesson. He was showing them that he had worth, and that worth had a price tag. Finally, the elder touched a jeweled ring on his finger. He used it to scan the data pad. There was a small beep. A transfer confirmation appeared on Mark's screen. "Done," the elder said. He sounded defeated. Mark looked at the screen. The money was in his account. 500,000 Federation credits. It was enough to buy a house on Earth. It was enough to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Mark put the data pad back in his pocket. He adjusted his torn jacket. He looked at the elder one last time. "Pleasure doing business with you," Mark said. He turned around. He looked at Lisa again. He looked at Prince Rayan, who was trying to brush dust off his robes and act like a prince again. Rayan would not look at Mark. He was too ashamed. Mark did not say goodbye. He did not say "I love you." He did not say anything. He just turned and walked toward the broken doors. The police officers stepped aside to let him pass. They looked at him with respect. The guests watched him go with fear and wonder. They knew they had seen a legend today. They had seen a human do what no alien could do. As Mark walked out of the hall, he left behind the silk, the jewels, and the fake people. He walked back into the real world. He was bleeding, he was tired, and he was rich. And for the first time in a long time, he felt free. Mark walked through the long corridors of the Ethelgard station. The walls were shiny and white, and the air smelled like lemon cleaning fluid. But now, there was a new smell in the air. It was the smell of fear. The aliens who worked in the station, shopkeepers, cleaners, and pilots, saw Mark coming. They saw the blood on his shirt and the knife in his hand. They quickly moved out of his way. They pressed their backs against the walls. They did not look him in the eye. Mark did not look at them. He just kept walking. His boots made a heavy sound on the metal floor. Clack, clack, clack. It was the sound of a predator walking. He felt a dull pain in his side where the spear had cut him, but he ignored it. He had felt worse pain before. Pain was just a message from the body. He did not have time to listen to it. Behind him, in the grand hall, the wedding was ruined. Lisa was sitting on a pile of broken glass. She watched her father walk away. She wanted to run after him. She wanted to apologize for ignoring him. She wanted to tell him that she was wrong. But she did not move. Prince Rayan stood up finally. He was brushing dust off his expensive silk coat. He looked angry, not scared anymore. He looked at the mess on the floor. "This is terrible," Rayan whined. "My father paid that human a fortune, and look at this mess. The food is ruined. The cake is smashed. How can I have a reception now?" Lisa looked at her husband. She felt cold inside. This was the man she chose. She gave up her strong, brave father for this weak prince who cared more about cake than about her life. She realized that her father did not just save her body, he had tried to show her the truth. She looked at the empty doorway where Mark had disappeared. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but she wiped it away. She had made her choice. Now she had to live with it. Mark reached the docking bay. It was a huge area with a giant glass roof looking out into space. There were many expensive spaceships parked there. They were sleek and silver, shaped like tears or birds. But Mark walked past all of them. He walked to the far corner, where the lights were dim. There sat his ship. It was not pretty. It was called the Hammer. It was an old cargo ship. It had scratches on the hull and patches of yellow paint over the rust. It looked ugly next to the alien ships. It looked like a brick in a room full of diamonds. But to Mark, it was beautiful. It was built by humans. It was thick and strong. It had a real engine that burned fuel, not a fancy gravity drive. It was reliable. Mark typed the code into the door panel. The ramp hissed and lowered. He walked inside. The air inside smelled like oil, coffee, and old leather. It smelled like home. He sat down in the pilot's chair. The leather was worn and soft. He let out a long breath. He was safe now. He pulled the datapad out of his pocket. The screen still glowed with the number, 500,000. He looked at the money for a long time. He did not care about being rich. He knew that the Xylov thought money could fix anything. They thought they bought his silence. They paid him to make the problem go away. Mark smiled a little. He touched the screen. He opened a new communication channel. It was a secure line to an account back on Earth. It was the account for the Human Veterans Fund. It was a charity that helped old soldiers pay for their medicine and their homes. He typed in the amount. 500,000. He pressed send. The money flashed across the stars. It left the shiny bank account of the Xylov and went to Earth. It would help hundreds of human families. The Xylov hated primitive things, but their money was now going to help the very people they looked down on. They paid to fix the damage, but the money would help the humans they despised. It was the perfect joke. Mark put the datapad away. He reached under his seat and pulled out a first aid kit. He took out a bottle of brown liquid and a bandage. He poured the liquid on his cut. It burned like fire. He did not flinch. He wrapped the bandage around his ribs and pulled it tight. "Computer," Mark said. "Start the engines." The ship groaned and shuddered. A deep rumble filled the air. The lights on the dashboard turned from red to green. "Permission to take off," the computer asked in a robotic voice. "Permission granted," Mark said. He grabbed the controls. The ship lifted off the floor. It rose slowly, then shot forward. The other ships in the base seemed to tremble as the heavy human ship passed them. Mark flew out of the station and into the black space. He looked out the window. The Ethelgard station looked like a bright jewel in the dark. It was pretty, but it was fragile. It was a glass house waiting to break again. Inside, they would go back to their parties. They would gossip and drink wine. They would try to forget that the primitive man had saved them. They would pretend that they were still superior. But they would never forget. Every time they looked at Mark's daughter, they would remember the blood. They would remember the fear. And they would know that the humans were not weak. Mark pushed the throttle forward. The stars turned into long lines of light. He set a course for Earth. He did not know what he would do when he got there. Maybe he would buy a small house by the ocean. Maybe he would just sit on his porch and drink a beer. It did not matter. He was free. He was not a guest. He was not a servant. He was not a disgrace. He was a human. He was a father who did his job. And now, he was going home. Far behind him, the station became a small dot. The silence of space wrapped around the ship. Mark closed his eyes for a second and listened to the hum of the engine. It was the sound of power. It was the sound of survival. The galaxy was big and full of aliens who thought they were better than him. But let them think what they wanted. Humans had been fighting since the beginning of time. They were strong, they were smart, and they never gave up. Mark opened his eyes and looked at the endless road of stars ahead. He smiled a true, real smile. He was the king of his own world. And that was enough.